there, welcome back to another review. Today we're going to be looking at the first film in the Lone Wolf and Cub series, known as Lone Wolf and Cub Sword of Vengeance, if I can talk properly. I've got my box set here from Criterion. We'll hopefully be trying to get through all the Lone Wolf and Cub films, but we'll be starting with the first one, as I say, Sword of Vengeance here today, based on the manga of the same name, which ran from 1970 to 1976. The manga itself was a big influence on so much, from like Frank Miller's Ronin series, or even to like the Mandalorian, the idea of like a strong warrior who travels with like a young child. It all pretty much picked up that sort of idea with a really strong warrior caring for somebody younger who like no combat experience or having to take this young person with them. And so you can look for evidence in that, and like the child in the Mandalorian, you can look for, there's elements of like sort of just the way the manga and everything is, like I say, obviously inspired Frank Miller a lot when he was creating like Ronin and stories like that. But so we're getting into the first film today. We'll try and get through all of them, but I'll say we'll start with the first one. A lot of people in the West, most notably probably know this like from like sort of the Shogun Assassin film, which is sort of the first two films sort of re-edited. But I'll say we'll be looking at the original here today, Sword of Vengeance, and just giving my review of it, what I think about it. Is it worth checking out? Even another one that was actually quite influenced by this film with the Tom Hanks film Road to Perdition, which of course was also as well based on a graphic novel. Again, just a father and his son sort of travelling together, like the father just bringing him into this world that he's not really used to, but just the idea is like, you've got to deal with it. This is the road, the path I'm taking, and he's bringing his son along with him. Road to Perdition very much influenced as well, like numerous other things by Lone Wolf and Cub. So the franchise itself, regarding, like I say, the manga, the films, it's influenced a lot. It really has influenced a lot, and no doubt a remake or a rehash is coming at some point. But we'll be getting into that today. The film chronicles as I say, mentioned the travels of a father and son, and excuse me, who after being like falsely accused and set up, wife murdered, he decides to take the demon path in order so that they one day will get revenge. The lead here is played brilliantly by Tomisaburo Wakayama, and this first film was made in 1972. There were 6 films in total, but we'll be looking at the first one today. The film starts off with this young child being sentenced to death. Ito Ogami is like the executioner, like our lead here, played by Wakayama. He was also actually I don't know if any of you have seen the film Black Rain with Michael Douglas, directed by Ridley Scott. He actually is in that as well. I think that was one of his last roles, I recall, or one of the very few English-speaking roles that he did, or like Western movies that he did. Then we move to him. I say he was the executioner. This child was basically about to be executed. He was the executioner. Then we move to him basically pushing his son and cart with a sign that reads "Son for hire, sword for hire." And then like this woman randomly comes up to him who's like hysterical. She doesn't know what's going on, and she just starts wanting to breastfeed his kid, and the son looks at him as though to say, like, what should I do here? And he's like, well, if you want to, like, go on. And she's hysterical because she's lost her child, so she just starts thinking this kid is her own, because obviously son for hire, sword for hire, and all is more fleshed out as the film goes along. And then she runs off again, still hysterical, and I think the woman's mum says, how much do I owe you? And, because, please forgive her, she's hysterical, she didn't mean to cause any offence or anything like that. He's like, I don't need your money. He was hungry anyway. So it just sort of sets the tone for the film. It's a very, I've obviously, disclosure here and now, I've never actually read the manga personally. I know it's based on a manga. I'm aware of the manga. I understand, with some of the stories with the manga, but I've never actually sat down and read the manga sort of from start to finish. I know it was absolutely, like I mentioned earlier, influenced so much. But these films are very harsh in their nature. There's a lot of, there's sort of sexual assault in this film. It's very much a real sort of, I'd say, violent film. But it's really good. It's really well done, acted really well, filmed really well. So much going for it. So yeah, as I say, so he was hungry. Going back to that woman, she starts breastfeeding him. He says, "Oh, don't give me any money." He was hungry anyway. So they carry on walking. Then it starts to rain, and this causes him to remember what happened in the past. So initially there's a few flashbacks as to what happened, as to why they're on the road together, like Lone Wolf and Cub, like why they are sort of just traveling together, and that he has sort of this deadpan look on his face all the time because he's taking like the demon path, and he's choosing to. It's a road that he can't come back from. So you get some flashbacks. So it starts to rain, and it causes him to remember what happened in the past. To cut a long story short, basically giving you a rough idea of the plot and what actually is, going on here. His wife was having a bad feeling and bad dreams, and that she was getting these bad vibes about stuff. And he, as a father, always wants his son to be strong and fearful. And then basically his wife gets murdered. She gets murdered, gets killed in retaliation for him sort of execute. These people murder her in like sort of retaliation for executing their sort of young lord. And they're basically framing him. They're setting him up. They're saying he's a traitor. That it's basically in a letter. There's proof of this at his family's temple, and that he says that's rubbish. There's what are you on about? There's proof of it at my temple. What do you mean? So they go to investigate in the temple, when somebody has planted like a memorial tablet, which I believe, obviously having no sort of context if you're not Japanese, but I think it's in a way sort of it's cursing the clan or something, or it's cursing somebody. I don't know exactly the whys and wherefore. Some of you out there might be able to explain that a lot more for me, but I think it's something to do like it's a sign of bad luck or something like that. Basically this rival clan is this rival crew of people. They're after sort of his job, really. They want him set up, they want him out. So it's basically just the whole thing. It's just a setup. I absolutely love the sword and splatter noises in this film. Like when he cuts his opponents down, you really get the noise, that the sound effects they use here are absolutely fantastic. Very interesting choice as well with the sound mixing. Depending on where sort of he is at the time, whereas Ito is at the time, you can't always hear the environment around him. You can't always hear like the water. You can't hear like sort of the rain in certain scenes. You can't hear like if he's in a river, fighting in a river, you can't hear sort of the noise that the water's making. I'd imagine that's because you're just getting a sort of maybe an idea, and just like he's blanking all that out or something like that. Maybe here's a metaphor in there with the sound. So he basically decides to walk a path of righteousness and seek vengeance against his betrayers, basically. It's really beautiful in the way it's shot, some of the scenes. Very bloody, as I mentioned, very violent, very, very bloody. Then he meets basically this Chamberlain. At one point he comes across this Chamberlain who basically wants to sort of, test, he wants to know his services. He wants to hire his services, but at the same time he wants to test him out as well. So he's two sort of henchmen. It's like, well, the only way we're going to know for sure is if we attack him sort of unknown, and these two are actually willing to die, to sacrifice himself in order to sort of test him, because they know he's probably going to kill them. So he sort of lets them sort of like attack him. The Chamberlain wants him to kill this group of people who are planning to sort of assassinate their lord and sort of replace him. A lot of that kind of thing going on with this kind of film. He even gets his two subordinates to attack and test him, but he sort of disposes them quite easily. He's kneeling down, having a conversation with the Chamberlain. The two come running up behind him without even blinking, just gets his sword, cuts them, and that's like they're disposed of. Doesn't even look at them at all. He's just totally right, and the Chamberlain confesses like, I had to test you, that kind of thing. We then get like another flashback of him sitting with his son. And this is very interesting, this scene where he offers his son either the choice of a sword or a ball. The ball being the choice that if you pick the ball, I will kill you now and you can go and join your mum. Mum's been killed. If you take the ball, then, I'll send you off and you can go and be with your mum. If you take the sword, then you're going to be stuck with me, and it's not going to be an easy road, and we're going to leave a lot of blood and vengeance and death and behind us. So that's, very interesting here. And that's been, obviously I won't need to say certain things where they've sort of done that kind of scene in many, many, many shows and films, offering the choice of the sword or the ball. I mean, the fact he's willing to kill his own son, just so he can spare him. It's not so like he wants to kill his son, but it's just saying so you don't have to go through basically what I'm going to have to go through, so you don't have to go through all this with me. Like you can take the easy way out, because obviously he wants vengeance for his wife's death and being set up and being framed. You know, basically he chooses to walk the path of hell with his father and get vengeance. The boy, you know, picks the sword, despite Ogami saying, you know, it would have been easier if you picked the ball. You know, it would have been, and there's a lovely little way where he cradles him and he holds him. And he says it would have been a lot easier if you just picked the ball. You know, as though, like I say, he wanted to spare him what he's going to have to go through and what's going to happen. From let's say that moment on, they will walk the path of death and blood and the demon way, as he calls it. They go to basically. All is still in flashback. They go to basically execute him, and he just starts laughing, like, and it's like, what you doing? And he's like, well, you've set me up, you know, I'm not having this. He starts slashing away at his enemies that have turned against him. One of the guys actually at one point goes to fight him. They run towards each other. The sun is in the way, and his son has got like sort of a reflective item on his head. So when he moves his head, he can see his son. The light gets in the way, and he just basically cuts his head clean off. And you can see the body like standing up, fully standing up. And it's very cleverly shot. It's really well done. And like I say, just this head lifts sort of body, and just the way it collapses, it looks awesome. It looks really good. With the blood in this, I'd imagine it would have been an absolute nightmare to shoot. I'd imagine it would. Bearing in mind, this is no CGI splatter. This isn't like John Wick stuff where they can just put the computer stuff and the digital stuff in later. This is all like real fake blood splurting out. So when it spurts out on people's clothes or furniture or items or walls or things like that, like there's big spurts of blood on wall. If that take didn't work and they had to redo it again, I'd imagine they'd have to clean the wall down again, reshoot it. Or put another panel of wall in. I don't know. But I'd imagine a bulk of this movie, or quite a lot of it, especially during the fight scenes, maybe would have been done in one take. Especially, like I say, where fake blood is sort of spurting and flying everywhere. I mean, it must have been a nightmare. Only when it just sort of hits things, like you know, as I say, in order for the film to flow, so it seems like it's all part of a connected, you know, finished product. If it doesn't sort of flow, and you think, well, hang on, there was a bit of blood on that wall, and now it's gone, it just wouldn't work. Like I say, I imagine it must have been done. A lot of the scenes were done in one take, and then he goes basically the last sort of third act of the film. I mean, the film doesn't. It's very much just a starting point for Lone Wolf and Cub. It's not like he gets his vengeance in this film. It's basically just an introduction, because they obviously knew there was going to be more than one film. So, the third act of the film, he goes into this village, and all he wants to do is use the spa. That's all he wants to do. But the village has been sort of overrun by bandits. And it's these bandits in question were actually the ones who the Chamberlain's after, that are going to execute that guy, so they can sort of execute the Lord, so they can sort of replace somebody else, take his place. So they go in there. The boss of these bandits, he swears he knows him from somewhere. He's like, where do I recognise that guy from? It doesn't occur to him. He's thinking, I swear I know him, because he's got it's like a shogun sword and like a proper established sword. And he's like, I don't know where I know this guy from, but I definitely know him from somewhere. Ito obviously hides his skills as much as possible, giving them even a fake name. He just wants to use the spa, but obviously the Chamberlain sort of said, look, can you take them out? So he sort of gets wind of this. He gets an idea of this. Gives them a fake name, and there is even a prostitute there that he gets forced to sort of make love to. As I say, it's very sort of harsh in some of the subject matter. Like I say, we got a sexual assault at one point. We got two people being forced into having sex for people's entertainment. Blood flying everywhere. It's a very sort of crude film, but it's a brilliantly well shot, well made film. I love the guy who plays, I think it's Mononosuke, I think that's his name, and he's got throwing knives. The guy who plays the part of him is really he's really cool in this, because he keeps wanting to test him and he can't. And he's very hot-headed, as all the bandits are. He just wants to know how good he is with the sword. as the bandits basically go to leave, they say they must kill some of them because they know they're going to spread the word that they've sort of, this has happened, so they want to keep it a secret. They said, like, we're going to kill you because you're going to let it out. One guy, because he's like sort of ill, he can't pick up a sword, to which he says to the leader, look, I can't do this, I can't even like sort of defend myself, you're just going to have to be my executioner. And that makes the lead bandit remember who the hell he's dealing with. That makes him sort of, it comes to him who actually, the executioner, who he's dealing with. So who, remember, like, so is. And then basically a bloody mess ensues. We got people's, like I say, limbs coming off, blood flying everywhere, spurting everywhere. I will say the films do pick up as they go along. I think personally they do anyway, but I will be reviewing hopefully all of them, all 6 films, and getting around to all of them. But this is a fantastic start for Lone Wolf and Cub. And even if you've never read the manga or it's not something you're familiar with, there's still films worth checking out. Just like I say, just some classic Japanese cinema here, some really from back in the day. So I think this was like I say 1972, but really well. I mean, this was around the time Bruce Lee was doing like Fist of Fury. Very, very different. I know one's Japanese, one's Chinese, but very different film, and a different approach to action, just the way it's done. But really cool, really cool. As I say, we got shins. There's limbs coming off, loads of fake blood. One guy, like I say, even gets cut off, sort of around his knees, shins area, and you just see like the legs, these feet just sort of still standing up, but he's been sort of cut off of his whole, like been severed from his whole body. And the way they film it was sort of, every shot must have been well planned and well calculated, but it looks like it's a fantastic. It's not too long either. That's another good thing. If you're not a fan of overly long films, like I'm not all the time, I sometimes much for my films to be sort of around 80 to 100 minute mark. I think this is just a little over 80 minutes. So I'd say it's really good. Moments like the Satoichi films, mainly more focused on the drama side rather than the action side, but that doesn't take anything away from it at all. No doubt a Hollywood remake will be happening soon, but as I say, I will try and get through all the Lone Wolf and Cub films. But if you've never seen any of them, please check them out. Or if you've only seen sort of like Shogun Assassin, please check out the Lone Wolf and Cubs. This box set is it's relatively cheap. It's definitely not as expensive as the Satoichi one, which obviously has got a lot more films in it. But check out Lone Wolf and Cub, and I hope you've enjoyed the review, and I'll see you soon.